Alright, let's go ahead and get started. How you guys doing? Doing good. Nice little easy stream today. So today I thought we're doing a stream. I was going to work on a little bit of our hex map populating that we did. We've done a couple times, a few times before on stream, so I thought we'd continue with that and do some more, answer some more sort of common D&D questions for dungeon masters and players, all that sort of stuff. Just make it nice and easy. Not quite sure how long I'm going to stream. We'll do it for a while. We'll kind of see how it is. Let me know if everything on the audio looks okay on my end, but let me know if you want to change it. Actually, I'm gonna reduce the music just a tad. There we go. That's a little bit better, I think. Of course, let me know if sounds off, but everything looks okay on my end. So we're just gonna keep on trucking on. So, like I said, pretty simple stream today. Just gonna do some things. We'll kind of do it like last time. We're gonna go through these hexes and populate them, and as we do that, as we sort of finish off one of the bigger hexes, we'll answer some questions. If you have questions, drop them in the chat, and we'll answer those questions. Otherwise, I have a list of sort of prepared questions to kind of go over. We'll kind of take a look at. Just gonna apologize in advance for, again, coughing. Still getting over that bronchitis, and it's just a slow, dry cough that just takes a long time to leave. Otherwise, I feel fine. Thanks for asking. But yeah, let's just jump into it. Of course, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and drop into the chat, and we'll see what's what. So let me get you guys hopped over to what I'm looking at, and then we can sort of move on from there. There we go. Actually, I am gonna change this out of that, just to make it a little bit easier. Oh man, actually, cough is, I think, worse today than it was yesterday. But otherwise, I feel fine for the most part. A little bit of a drippy nose, that's about it though. Alright, so this is, where did we leave off? We left off right here, just sort of right in the center here. That's where we ended up leaving off last time with our hex sort of thing. We've done all this down here, and now we're up to here. But we gotta go all the way up here. Over here on the right. So, we got a ways still. But slow and steady wins the race. Just keep plodding on, and I've just been doing this on stream, so I haven't worked on it any extra. Because people have seemed to enjoy these sort of low not stress. What's a good word for that? Sort of I guess cozy kind of stream is really the right terminology for that. So we're going to jump back in, and let's go ahead and get to it. So, as you can see, we have this major religious site over here. So that's what's in this big hex guy over here, one of our larger hexes. And so everything around that would be a frontier hex, and we have now exited the frontier hex, and we are back into the wild hexes, which means there's not a very high likelihood of a point of interest. We only have a 1 in 6 chance of a point of interest, and so we got to roll 1, basically. And we'll just kind of go through this. So, 1, 2, just kind of count until we get there. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so then on our 11th, 1, 2, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that's right there. We're going to have some sort of POI. Some point of interest. That's a 14 on our point of interest. Which means it's a some sort of conflict area. So we represent that with, we've been using our sort of frost guys here. There we go. And I don't think me double check. Let me see if I can find another conflict area real quick. I can't remember. I don't think we've been... We're not going into too much detail on these. Okay. Oh, I just realized that I have the incorrect document up. It's using this paper document, but what I actually need is the digital one. So actually, I'm gonna throw us out of that real quick, just so I don't dox myself, and then I'll pull that document up real quick. Should take just a second. I think it's in my Google Drive. This map. Let's see, exploration travel. Hold on. Is it under here? I don't think it's under here. Doop. No, that's the same document that I've got. That's the same document that I have printed out. It's not what I'm looking for. We got campaign start. I don't think it's... I don't think it's under here. No. Hold on. I can probably search for this based off the the information I'm looking for. That's it. Actually, maybe another place. It might actually not be in my drive. It might actually be somewhere else. Hold on. What? Now it just looked like I am wholly unprepared, which is... I didn't think was the case. Let's go. Ah, there it is. One moment, please. Alright, there we go. Okay. Now this is coming together. Now we got it. Alright, hold on. There we go. So let's see. Here we go. This is what we were looking for. We need these guys down here. Because we were doing some more detail than I thought we were initially. That's okay. We can keep looking at it. So let's roll a couple of d4s real quick. All right. So it's going to be some sort of old battleground or camp or something. So it's an old one with no hunt and no salvage. All right. Which is actually exactly this. I'm actually going to... And we're done. That's the first one in the books. So let's keep on moving. And let's get our d6s going. 1, 2... Again, we have to roll a 1. 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14. Okay. Seems like a unweighted d6. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, so we got something here. And this hex right here. What's it gonna be? Oh, dude, that's a holding. And it's gonna have... So we're dealing with cities, so this is going to have some sort of village attached to it. So... technically that should be under 1,000. So that's not gonna work. So we'll say 820 people. 820 people, and then we can go over here and we can go back up to holdings, which is 2. Right, which means that there's some sort of probably a noble that lives here, but it could also be like a fighting order. It could be it's probably not a monastery or anything like that, but it could be some sort of holding. It could be a royal estate. Oh, man. Could be a royal estate. It could be a number of different things. So let's see. Let's just roll a d6, and that'll tell us. Oh, and it is well fortified. There we go, that's better. And we need to put our icon down, so of course we've been using this. Coat of arms shield. Oop. That goes down right there. And we've only got 6 more hexes. And we don't roll any of them. We don't roll 1 on any of them. So that's the thing that you'll see sort of in the wilds, and we can kind of see that gradation away. So over here we see in these larger hexes to the west, we can see there's actually quite a few POIs, but once we get further away from sort of like this major religious site, which is acting as sort of a hub of civilization, it cuts off pretty quickly. Right, there's only like 2 little things back here. So this is what we've got over here is probably this holding here might be some sort of kind of on the front here, so they might be sort of like a marcher lord of some type, maybe a margrave, marquis, etc. So that explains why their keep is so well fortified. It's because they're in charge of holding the borderlands. So there we go. And so that's 1 done. One of our larger hexes done. So let's look at a question before we go on to something else. And take a look at check. Alright. And let's pull up our list. So this is just sort of some basic advice I thought it would be really easy for me to sort of just kind of talk about, and that'll be good for any, dungeon masters or players with sort of any experience. So the first one is about you want to get better at sort of the game or get into it. Know the basics. So there is, I don't know, there's a lot of sort of back and forth and sort of advice about that. There are people that are like, you need to have pretty good fundamentals of the game, and I lean more towards that, especially if you're a DM looking to run the game. I think that you should have a pretty firm understanding of the rules, but that doesn't mean like an encyclopedic knowledge of everything about the rule system. Probably in this specific sort of context, we're primarily talking about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but it could be any tabletop RPG. If you are in that sort of behind-the-screen role as the game master, storyteller, referee, dungeon master, whatever you want to call it, it is You don't need to have an encyclopedic knowledge of every bit of sort of rules minutia, but I do think it's important to have a very sort of basic understanding about the major things that you're going to need to take on as part of the game, especially because assuming that you are relatively new to the game and you're running the game, it's likely that the people that you're playing with are even newer to the game. And so they're going to kind of look towards you as far as knowing the rules and things like that. Kind of knowing those rules and looking to you to make adjudications about that. So you kind of need to know the basics, have that sort of firm understanding of the sort of the basic knowledge. So I think probably the best thing to do is get that firm understanding. And what would I call the firm understanding? Like the absolute basics you need to know is probably the 3 types of D20 tests, right? That's an ability or skill check, a saving throw, and an attack roll. So if you learn those 3 and how they're different and where they're used compared to each other, that's extremely helpful. That is literally the basic of the game. That's the core mechanic. That's what everything in the game is built upon. I would also suggest getting a sort of quick reference for some of the most common rules that come up. Some of the most usual things you're going to need to adjudicate. So, for me, and I think probably any dungeon master should do that, is have your own sort of like DM binder. Mine's a folder instead of binder because I like it to lay flat and not take up too much space. And I don't have too much in it. But it kind of covers sort of the basic, these first 2 pages in it, kind of cover the basic quick references that I might need to kind of come up. So the first part is combat actions, like what are the actions you can take during combat. That's a good thing to know. When you have players that don't know what to do on their turn, you can be like, alright, well you can make an attack, you can cast a spell, you can dash, you can disengage, you can dodge, you can try to escape a grapple, you can try to grapple someone, you can help another, try to give them advantage on whatever they're doing, you can hide, you can ready an action with the trigger, you can take a search, you can look for things, you can shove someone, you can try to push a creature, you can stabilize a dying creature, you can use any ability that you have or use an object that you have, so an item, things of that nature, like drinking potions, things like that. So it's good to know those. I have those when people ask about like, oh, I don't know what to do during combat. I can be like, oh, well, you can take a look at these, right? These are sort of the common actions, as well as knowing the sort of basic action economy, which is right a standard action, a bonus action, and then movement, which is itself not an action. And one important thing to remember about movement is that you can do what's called split move and fire, which means you can use part of your movement, do some sort of action, and then use the rest of your movement, which is not always super apparent if you're new to the game. That right, especially if you come from sort of like the video game background, where usually in a tactical RPG you have to move and then act, or you might act and then move, but you can't move, act, and then keep moving most of the time. Other things, I have conditions in here, where the basic conditions and what do they do, because those are going to come up every once in a while. Things like grapple rules, exhaustion, and over here, sort of improvised numbers, which I think are really important. That's actually something you can find in the DMG. I use a slightly different rubric that's a little bit easier than having to memorize that table, because there's a table that kind of comes with it. And so I just changed the table a little bit, so it's just a formula for me based off of the level of the characters and what type of threat they are. But the nice thing about sort of improvised damage effects specifically. It's just going to give you a lot of, it's going to give you that sort of backbone where you can make adjudications and make rulings during the game that make sense. It's very similar to the limited damage formula, and I forget what page it is in the DMG, but there is a table for it. It's very similar to the fall damage, which is 1d6 per 10 feet. Instead, it's basically 1d6 or 1d10 plus some extras. It gets a little wobbly as you get into higher levels per level. And these are sort of like what they call limited damage. So that's damage that basically isn't like a standard attack that, you know, a creature could do. It's more like a dragon's breath attack, or like rocks fall, something like there's a cave in or something like that. There's like something that happens, a hazard or an obstacle that deals damage, and you need to know what damage makes sense. Well, you take whatever the character's level is, whatever the average party level is. Let's say they're 3rd level. So the way that I use it, let's say that it's a 3rd level party. They accidentally knock down the pillar, and part of the ceiling collapses, and you know they make a dexterity saving throw to get out of the way. But how much damage do you give them? Well, I give them 3d6 plus 3, which those 3s come from their party level. So they would get what is that? So 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 points of bashing falling damage if they didn't save, and then they get half of that, so 6 points of damage if they did save. Very simple. Just a very easy thing to keep in mind. It's really, really helpful. Along with that is figuring out how to make difficulty classes DCs, which is, there are a bunch of different rubrics for that. I have my own, but really, anything that's sort of 13 to 17 range is usually considered kind of the normal average. And then if you want something that seems like it should be harder than that, it goes up to what? 20, 25, 30, something like that. So once you hit like basically 20, that becomes a particularly difficult thing for somebody to accomplish with a skill check, a saving throw, or even an attack roll. Right, very similar. Especially with 5th edition that has very flat math. The modifiers don't go up a lot with something, unlike something like Pathfinder, where you'll get to the point where you have modifiers for rolls that are in the 10s and 20s pretty routinely. And then the last thing I sort of have on those first 2 pages is sort of the proficiency list. So that's just for me, so I can look at it when they're trying to players trying to do something that's kind of clever, or maybe kind of, you know, non-traditional. It doesn't make you're not really sure what the role should be. I have the proficiency list, and that includes the skills as well as sort of toolkits and things like that. So I can take a look at that. No. I can take a look at that, and then I can kind of decide very easily what seems like it would be the most appropriate check to use. So, yeah, that's it. As far as sort of the basics, a quick reference is really helpful to help you sort of do those mathematical improvisations sort of as you're going through it. As well as, you know, making sure that you understand what the characters can do, sort of the actions, and then know how to call for sort of the very basic tests and what the different types of rolls are, right? Knowing the difference between when to call for a check, when something should be instead of saving throw versus an ability check. And when, like, say if they're trying to damage a door, trying to decide, okay, is that an ability check or is that an attack roll? Those sorts of things. But yeah, so that's the first one sort of out of the way. Let's go back and let's do our next head. So again, everything over here, as far as we can tell, literally right here, so you guys can see it. But there is not another sort of significant point of interest until we hit over here, which is another sort of center of civilization. So we are firmly in the wilds or wilderness belt. So we're not going to have a ton of point of interest around here. So we should hopefully rip through this pretty quickly. And again, if you guys have any questions, very specific questions that you want answered, make sure and drop those in the chat and we'll address those. And if not, we'll keep going with the questions we already got lined up. So we are right here. Okay, so the 5th spot is going to have 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll just roll our d20. And we rolled a 5, which is... oh, a crossing. Crossing of some type. So this is probably a bridge, or it could be a boardwalk. It's in here. Now we are in the wilds, so we've got a little lake for crossing. So the numbers are slightly different in this document than the other one. It doesn't really matter. They're very similar to each other. There's not a big difference, so it just kind of depends on whichever one I look at first. So is this dangerous or in disrepair? We'll roll a d6. Yep. So this is, alright, so is it, it's in, let's go with disrepair. Is it manned or told? Oh, it is, okay. So instead we'll go with, it's manned or told, which is kind of weird for the wilds. It's very unlikely that's going to happen. And let's go with dangerous. So this is probably something that might be the classic sort of Little John, right? There's some sort of bandit that's maybe holding control over it. So we're going to just put down dangerous and told. We're not going to get down into the specifics of, you know, who's actually taking care of this. Just know that it's dangerous and told. And we know it's a crossing. You don't really need to know what type. It's going to be... This is taking place located in a wetlands. It's probably going to be either a bridge or a boardwalk. Some way to sort of get across that sort of sunken, watery areas. But there is going to be a village associated with it. So let's just go ahead and round it up. So there's a village with about 680 people in it. So toll, we can talk about toll real quick. So tolls are very, very, just historically very, very common in sort of our anachronistic sort of Dark Ages, medieval times, Renaissance times. And there's basically, so, and this kind of goes back to how taxation is done. Taxation isn't done sort of like how we do it today, which is very sort of top-down, very strong central government style. It would be impossible for a king to sort of basically stay on top of what each individual peasant in their kingdom was doing and know how to tax them and whether they had been taxed. Like that's if you look at somebody like, it's a good example, sort of a big one that's sort of out of control. Like Charlemagne. So Charlemagne, you know, at the peak of sort of that Carolingian Empire has about 10 million subjects in it. Yeah, given the level of technology and statecraft, not going to be able to sort of like assess 10 million people's tax levies. So, not going to be able to do that. So instead what they would do is that they would have basically service tolls, which kind of works a little bit more like sales tax, right? So it's like, hey, you want to use the bridge? You got to pay the toll. You want to get into the city? You got to pay the toll. You want to use the road? You got to pay the toll. And tolls are usually assessed by either, usually by feet or heads or axles or wheels. It kind of depends. They're kind of all over the place. But the idea being that the specifics are kind of vague, but basically every person would have to pay a specific toll, and then you would have to pay a specific toll for every head of animal if you were, driving in animals to market, and every axle of a vehicle. So that's, and the beast of burdens that accompany them. So if it was a hand cart, you'd have to pay for yourself plus the axle of the cart. Whereas something like a carriage, you would have to pay for the driver. There's probably the footman. There might be some accompanying riders, and then you'd have to pay for all the horses and everybody inside the carriage. So it gets quite expensive quite quickly. But that's a nice thing nice sort of element to add into the game, into your D&D games, where, right, most adventurers don't get taxed, right? So instead you can integrate sort of like tolls as a way to sort of make it feel like they still have to pay upkeep to the state as they adventure. And so the more you travel, the more you adventure, the more sort of tolls you pay. If you come in and out of a city a whole bunch, you have to end up paying a lot of gate tolls. So that is that. Let's keep... gotta put our little icon down. I'm trying to remember what we used for our crossing. Were we using stars? Maybe we're using this. Now I gotta remember. I should probably codify these at some point. Oh yeah, that's crossing, so we can do that. That's fine. Where were we? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're here. Wait, did I just lost my place. Where were we at? We're here, right? I think I just accidentally edited out the secret notes. That's okay. $680. Just need to put our stamp down. There we go. Let's keep moving forward. So again, gotta roll 1. So 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right here. Rolled a 16, which is the one I just looked at, a treasure rumor. So we're using a question mark for that. D6. 4. So it's trapped. And this is sort of like a nice side quest for them to pick up. It's sort of a think about it as sort of like pirate treasure or a number of different, anything that's sort of like a rumor, like a long lost treasure, things of that nature, a burial mound that's lost somewhere. The sort of thing that sort of like tomb robbers are going to be interested in, but also adventurers. Very simple. Alright, that's 5. That's 10. 11. 13. Okay. 1, 2, 3. 5, 6, 7, 8. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Right here on this actual water hex. So 18 is a landmark, some sort of landform or wonder. Which is artificial. So some sort of natural wonder. Or landmark. You could say that is the lake itself. And it is monster occupied. And I don't need to know what this is, but it could be, who knows, it could be some sort of like underwater cable network, it could be a lot of things. Actually, I'm gonna do this way. Natural, and it is monster occupied. Again, this is APL 11 through 16 for our average party. So a pretty significant monster lives here, or group of monsters. So this is not a place a lot of people want to spend a lot of time around. We're going to go ahead and add a little thing. Add a little stamp. And that is that. Let's find the next. Keep going. Five. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So right here. What type? Oh, another conflict area. Go ahead and put that down here. This might be related to those monsters that are just at that hex that's just to the northeast of it. Maybe. We're not figuring that out right now, right? This is very top level, very basic ideas. I don't want to start fleshing out stuff until I know, like, players are going to go here and deal with this. Otherwise, it stays very, very vague. I just know that there is something there, and so if never comes up where they want to talk about it or they're looking for adventures sort of in the general area, I can sort of give them that information and they can take a look at it. But what type of conflict area is it? So, couple D4s, right? D4 right off the bat. Okay, so this is an active battle. Go ahead and make that a conflict area. So very interesting. So we know, we could probably guess that, right, one side are the monsters from from that sort of larger lake area. But we don't necessarily know who the other combatants might be. It might have something to do with this city, right? We have a city that's to the southwest directly, so maybe that's the conflict area that they're running into. We also have over here to the sort of east-southeast, we have a powerful mage tower. There's a powerful caster that lives in that area, who might also be involved with it. Already it's sort of giving us ideas about sort of what's going on. We also have this major ruin, so maybe this is the cause of the major ruin down here? Right, there's also an ongoing conflict here. So this is, so we're basically, this hex down here is also ongoing conflict. So this is clearly a very large battleground that's kind of going on. It's very interesting, right? That's already going to give us a nice sort of central tension backdrop for whatever sort of adventuring we do in the area. That, you know, you can draw the players in and their PCs into. So we got 3 more hexes. Roll the 1. So our last one here is going to be right here. And what is it going to be? A 13, which is... oh, a ruin. A ruin of what? Ruined information sign. Information signage. Let's see. Well, let's roll a d6. Alright, so some sort of directional signage that's been ruined. Let's do ruin. And I'm actually going to drop this down to the next level, next line. Information signage. So this looks like it might also be a casualty of the sort of like ongoing conflict that's in the area. Is a ruin, so we'll use our little pirate flag here. Our tattered flag. That's sort of our ruins. There we go. And we have finished with this hex, with this larger hex, because we already tested those 2 hexes at the bottom. So we'll start right here. Now this is primarily an ocean hex, which means there's only a 10% chance that even if we roll something that there's going to be anything in it. So we can go ahead and do that. I think, you know, I should have written it down. I think we were doing 10% less. A 1d10. It was either 1d10 or 1d20. I think it was 1d10. Where we basically used a 1d10 instead of a 1d6 for coming up with things. Yeah, but it could have been a 20. No, there's quite a few. There's too many. It had to be 10. And we'll roll for those. And that's the hex, the primary hex as a whole. So all these hexes in here, regardless of whether they are water or land, we'll be rolling that 1d10 on. But first, we're going to look at some advice, questions, that sort of stuff. So last time we looked at our talked about knowing the basics. The next one is starting small. So according to this, that's begin with a simple one-shot or a short adventure to get a feel for DMing before diving into a long campaign. I agree. If you are brand new to running games, absolutely run one-shots. More importantly, don't try to create your own one-shots off the bat. It's going to be very helpful, or at least I know that I personally found it helpful, sort of getting into the Dungeon Master seat by running short, like one-shot adventures that other people created. So, because that's going to give you, if you run, say, 5, a dozen, somewhere in there, you're going to start to be able to look at them sort of in a very educated way. You're going to be able to discern, what did work, what didn't work, why did those things work, why did these things not work. And so it'll start to give you an idea about how to build your own adventures by giving you the practical experience of running somebody else's adventures. It very much falls into the advice of, like, sort of technical advice of developing. That's things like software developers run into, whereas the idea is fail fast, right? Run a whole bunch of things because the more varied things that you run, you do the same thing over and over and over again through repetition, you're going to be able to determine what works and what doesn't very quickly. And that's going to be, in general, plus the specifics of you as a DM, what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you need to work on, and your group specifically, like what do they like, what do they not like, what do they engage with, what do they don't. And once you learn those tendencies, you're going to be able to make your own adventures and campaigns that are going to be very pleasing for everybody in the group, because you're going to know what to focus on, and you're going to know your strengths and weaknesses as a DM, so you can lean into those strengths and work on the weaknesses, but kind of eschew them for the most part, right? If you don't, for example, if you don't do a lot of character voices, you don't do that as a DM, it's going to be best if you kind of stay away from doing a lot of sort of very heavy dialogue scenes with a bunch of NPCs, right? You might want to more just sort of bullet point some of that out, or basically make sure that the party's only ever talking to like 1, maybe 2 NPCs at a time. So that way it's always clear who they're talking to, because you're not doing voices or things like that. As well as working on things like narrating their mannerisms or how they act and things like that. So that way you can sort of, if you're not doing that sort of emoting part, as well as sort of that very specific mannerism and speech sort of mannerisms and tendencies, it's still going to be clear. You're still going to be able to give those NPCs some sort of personality that's going to resonate with your players. But yeah, and that's just general good advice, is to start small, focus on doing that. Don't be tricked like a lot of newer DMs that are getting into the hobby, right? You look at things like actual plays, Dimension 20, Critical Role, Adventure Zone, things like that, where there are these massive worlds and these, level 1 to 20 campaigns, and that can be very overwhelming and think that you have to do that. Don't do that. Actually, most games don't do that. The truth is that as a DM, if you're lucky, you're probably going to run a handful of, like, if you're extremely lucky, you're going to run a handful of level 1 to 20 campaigns probably in your entire life. So instead, kind of focus on running shorter adventures, shorter campaigns, and make them small, make them personal, make those stories, smaller, more personal, and you're probably going to have a better time. It's going to be easier for you, and your players are probably going to have a better time because they're going to be more impactful. Right? A short, well-contained story narrative that you tell, that experience, is going to be, that has a definitive start and a definitive end, is going to be much more memorable than the countless number of campaigns that start at level 1 and, burn out after half a dozen sessions, which is more the norm than not. And so, if you want to be a better DM, try not to do that. Basically the idea. We're going to jump into the next one, take a short break, to get something for my throat, try to soothe it up a little bit, and we'll keep going. So I'll be back in just a minute. Alright guys? See you in just a second. Alright, let's go ahead and back. There we go. Go ahead and hit it back. Let's see, we are jumping right back into our little hex mapping. And of course, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop them into the chat and we'll take care of those. Otherwise, once we get done with one of these larger hexes, this next larger hex, we will jump in and take a look at some advice and talk about that and my feelings about that. So, right, we have this ocean hex. So instead of a D6, we're going to roll that D10. Again, we're still in the wild, so we got to roll a 1. So let's see what ends up coming up. Alright, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So this hex is going to have something in it, some sort of point of interest. Go ahead and drop that in. That is a 4, which is going to be number 4 on our list. Oh, a travel haven. So go ahead and add that in here. Add a little stamp for our travel haven. Go ahead and add that in right here. So this could be an inn, some sort of caravan stop. Could be anything like that. It could be just a common sort of camp that people travel through. But because of this, there is a larger one, so that means there is actually going to be a village of some size attached to it. Thanks. Yep. Thanks for tuning in. Again, if you guys have any questions, just drop them in the chat. So it's going to be somewhere between 400 and 1,000 for the population here, so 597. So we'll round that up. So a village here that's got a population of about 600. That's sort of attached to this sort of travel haven. I don't think there's anything else that we really need to know about the travel haven at this point. I guess we could roll for it. Roll D4 for it. Oh, we rolled a 4. Okay, so some sort of survival shelter or cache. Or supplies cache. So it could be sort of like a hunting lodge, something like that, something that people use and travel with, kind of stop in, and then there's sort of a small village that's attached to it. Because again, we're at the region level, so we're at the second level down as far as hex mapping goes. We still under this have the county level and then the local level. So things are still pretty high up, so we're going to have some larger sort of population center settlements attached to things. That's what we have here. So this might be some sort of, it could be a way station, some sort of, you know, if it's a survival shelter, if it's a travel haven, what it probably is it's probably some sort of natural harbor or bay that people come into that protects them from storms and things like that. That's probably what this is, since we're out on the water. Or it could be sort of a small island somewhere that people stop by. And we keep going on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Wow. 21. All right. Wow. Quite a bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Alright, so that most of our Hex is done and doesn't have anything in it, which makes sense because again we're sort of in the wilds area, so there's not going to be a lot of sort of points of interest as far as sort of like humanoids are concerned for our sort of fantasy area here. But what is it? 7. 7 is, oh, it's meeting place. So meeting places are kind of a weird thing that kind of are very specific to this sort of anachronistic time period, where if you want to have some sort of assembly of people, most structures, buildings are, because of the constraints of construction materials and knowledge, are relatively small and compact. So if you want to meet with a bunch of people, most of the time you're going to do that outside. So it's going to be some sort of probably outdoor. It could be like an amphitheater. It could be sort of like a hillock that's sort of a promontory that kind of makes sense. That kind of gives you an overall look over everything. It's very similar to places like it's famous in like Athens. I think it's in Athens. It's certainly in Greece. I'm pretty sure it's in Athens. The Nyx, that's P-N-Y-X, which is basically an area where people met for as far as governments were concerned. This is an outdoor area. But sort of similar to an amphitheater, but not one of those. So we have a meeting place. Sort of like people might hold all things, moots, things of that nature. And let's see, where's that at? Can also be like a fairgrounds or a holiday place. So we only have 5 here, so let's roll a d6. 5. Alright. Alright, so it's some sort of sanctuary or free space. Okay, good to know. So it could be sort of like a commons, a place where, you know, bloodshed's not really supposed to happen, where criminals can find sanctuary, things of that nature. But we do need a little icon for that. I think we're gonna put, I think a star makes the most sense for that. So we'll take our little star, our little icon, and we will drop it down in here. And then we have 6 more things that might show up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we actually rolled a bunch of ones. Okay. Well, wasn't expecting that. Oh, right. I forgot we're rolling d10s, not d6s, because we're in the water. So we rolled 1 more. Right down here. And what is this? 10 is an omen or warning. And we can take a look at our sheet for omens and warnings. A little d6 for what type. Again, these are very, very loose and vague. So some sort of boundary notice or stone. Let you know sort of like whether you are entering or leaving a specific domain, somebody's domain, and what laws you may or may not be held to. Which does make sense if we have sort of this sanctuary area that's nearby. It makes kind of sense. Right, we do know that there's Major City right here. So there are some civilized people around. But this might be sort of like the end of their domain down here. Which probably makes sense with sort of the meeting place that's sort of on the boundary of those lands. So this is, we use our little eye because it's information. that's it. And we have this hex done. So, obviously we still have a bunch of hexes to do. Jump in and take a look at some of that. Right, we have quite a ways to go. We're not going to do that all today, obviously. It's a little bit of a slow process, but we are doing it sort of on stream. At least we have been. People seem to enjoy it, so we're going to keep doing it. And back to where we were. Yep. And then we'll start off with this hex. It's next. And again, the size for each of these sort of smaller hexes, the hexes that we're dealing with, is... Well, I have the sheet next to me that has the actual area on it, but there's essentially, let's see, how far across are they? They're 1 degree across, so they're about 60 to 70 nautical miles across, depending if you're going point to point or side to side, which is, you just need to multiply that by an extra, what is it, 15%? 1.15. So, you know, it's 70 to 80-ish miles across, statute miles, normal miles, across for each of these hexes. So they're relatively sizable. And is close to what we would consider, what is kind of considered, if we want to make an average of what a county is, what a count would actually be in charge of, is about one of these hexes. Which makes sense because the next level down is county hexes. Which is exactly what we're looking at. So, it makes sense. Let's see. What's our topic? So we talked about starting small. Sort of next one is communication is key between sort of like dungeon masters and players who are playing. And again, this is just sort of generic advice. It's just kind of pulled in so we can kind of talk about it a little bit. If you guys have any, obviously, specific questions, just drop them in. We'll look at those specifically. But these are just sort of some general things. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be, there's an actual session 01 that's on this list, but communication, it talks about open communication, talking about specifically with the players, talking about expectations of the game, what everybody wants out of it, play styles, preferences, etc. Very important. So, we talked about this a little bit, I think, in the last stream. We talked about it's very important to determine get the right group of players for what you're trying to do in the game, because there's a big difference between running a mega dungeon where you are running in and kicking down doors and slaying monsters and you're getting loot to get more levels, to kick down more doors, to slay more monsters, to get more loot, to get more levels, etc., etc. That game loop is very different than doing something that might be very sort of story-based or has a lot of sort of like political elements of it, things, a sort of game that doesn't focus on dungeon delving, right? So those players are not going to be the same in a successful game, right? You might have a lot of power gamers and slayers over on the mega dungeon side, as well as maybe some explorers and things like that, tacticians, things of those nature. They're really going to enjoy that type of game. Because on the other side, you're going to have more of your actors or role players and storytellers who want to unravel the narrative and try to figure out, be a part of sort of like that Dominion play and things like that, other sort of drama and tension and cloak and dagger stuff and doing a lot of those other sort of things, right? Those groups, by necessity, are not going to be the same because it's not the same type of game. So when you have an idea for a game and you're trying to pull a table together, assuming that you're not playing with people you've already played before and you're trying to make a new game, it's very important to be clear about expectations of what type of game you're running and try to get a sense of what players want out of the game, because that'll tell you whether that person's going to be right for this game, for this group, or not. And If you're playing with an already established group, you just reverse that order. Hopefully you've been playing with these people for a little bit, so you kind of understand their tendencies. You know what parts of the game, pay attention to your players, what parts of the game they engage with, what parts of the game they don't. Like, do you have a player who's really not interested in combat that much? They don't make very sort of like optimized characters. When they get choices for like feats or skills or things like that, they choose more roleplay centric things. They don't choose things that are going to be like combat helpful or dungeon helpful, like in that exploration part. Well, then you know sort of what they're looking to get out of the game. And so the idea is that if you can understand each sort of player's predilections, you can synthesize a game that's going to, on average, make sure that everybody gets a little bit of what they want out of the game, including yourself. You're also a very important piece of that sort of mixture, probably the biggest slice of the pie, because there's fewer things that are less fun in D&D than running a game that you're not interested in running, that you're not invested in. That's where a lot of sort of DM burnout can come from. Is like, if you're not interested in running the game because the material of the game is not interesting to you, well, you by definition have to be the most invested in the game. And so if you're not invested in it, it's going to be very difficult to create a game that your players are going to be invested in. So you have to find out that balancing act about what you want out of the game, what your players want out of the game, and how you can juggle those enough that everybody is happy with at least most of the aspects of the game. And that may be, depending on the game, asking somebody to sit out of the game and look for a new player. Because you might have to tell them, like, hey, we're going to play this sort of like very high RP game. I know that you're not interested in that, so do you want to sit this one out? Right? It's not because they're that guy, right? You're not kicking them out of the group. You're just like, hey, we want to run this very specific type of game next. It's not something that I know you're very interested in. Do you want to maybe, sit this one out, and maybe we'll find, another player to play with for this one. And then, when we come back and do maybe a more standard dungeon delve kind of thing, I'll hit you up when we're ready to do that, or we run one shot or whatever. It's okay to have that conversation. Just make it clear that you're not kicking the person out of the group. You're just telling them, hey, we're interested in running this very specific type of adventure or short-term game or whatever we're going to do, short campaign. And you can play with it if you want. I'm just letting you know up front that, hey, the expectation is this and this and this, and this is what we're going to focus on. And I know that's not what you're particularly interested in doing with your games. So maybe this is where you play some Baldur's Gate. Maybe you look for another sort of like online group that's maybe doing one-shots, things like that, while we do this. And then once we're done with it, or the campaign falls apart, I'll reach out to you and we can get back together and figure out what we're going to do next. Very simple. So yeah, communication is key. Just be open, be honest about it. And I think what's kind of most important here, that's kind of the reading between the lines, is making sure that, especially if you're the dungeon master, that you take your own expectations, play styles, and preferences into consideration. If anything, they should be the primary consideration. Because whether you want to call it a DM shortage or not, whatever you want to call it, is that if you're willing to run the game, you should be able to run the game that you want to run, right? And so you need to find players who want to play in the sort of game that you want to run. Because if you don't do that, if you try to force players who aren't interested in that type of game into the game, you're not going to have fun and they're not going to have fun. So it's about trying to find that right balance, that right mesh of people, personalities, and play styles that's going to make sense and going to set your game up so it can actually be successful. But yeah, that's that one. Again, if you guys have any questions, just drop it in. But otherwise, we'll hop back in and we'll start doing this next hex. So obviously this hex is a land hex, so we are switching back from that 1d10 to 1d6. And we will get going with that. Let's see. Start rolling. Again, we're still in the wild, so we only do it on 1. But we rolled a 1. So rolled a 4, that's another travel haven. So we'll go ahead and add our little stamp down in here. We're using this little house icon. Drop that in right there. And what kind of travel haven is this? Again, the numbers don't necessarily line up because I'm actually working off a different document. It has all the same things, it's just in a slightly different order. Because I just wrote them at 2 different times and did not cross-reference them. 2. Caravansary. Okay. So let's add that. Travel, haven, caravansary. So for those uninitiated, caravansary is just sort of it's sort of like a, how do you call it? It's sort of like a fortified inn, kind of. So it has its own sort of like bailey courtyard, as well as sort of stabling, interior stabling. So it's something you see that's, built for caravans. Places for them to stop and resupply, maybe do some trading. It's sort of like a little self-contained inn, market, stable area. It's very interesting. I really like them, and I really like to add them to the games. I will pull up a picture of them in just a second. But actually, I'm going to drop this down here because there's going to be some sort of village attached to it. Because again, we're working at that region hex level. 950. 960. So a pretty large village, actually, almost becoming a city. I basically put the breakpoint for a city at 1,000 people, which trying to lower those population levels than you might see in normal fantasy, even though some of our larger cities get quite large. Some of these cities has almost 30,000 people in it, which is pretty sizable for a medieval-esque city. Actually, quite sizable. So we have our travel haven, caravansary. That's right, we're gonna. They kind of. So it's very, very sort of Silk Road, Arabian kind of look. Here's a good look at what the interior of one might look like. So, like I said, they're kind of this weird sort of fortified, stable kind of inn thing. So if you kind of look at it, it's sort of like a mixture between sort of an inn, a stable, a market, and sort of like almost like a neighborhood block, right? An apartment block with sort of like this internal courtyard. That's good. Take a look at this one, right? And so there are kind of these sort of defendable travel havens that are just kind of out in the middle. Often in the middle of sort of like nowhere, because they're for travelers. But they're really cool things, so consider adding something like this if you want to, place sort of like an inn or a safe place for your adventurers to stop off that's kind of in the middle of nowhere, right? You can do that, right? These are really great ways to do that. And so this place is kind of off by itself, so the person who owns this is probably not a noble of any sort of amount, but they are probably a pretty lucrative merchant. So these usually show up in areas where, there's a high amount of trade. Again, very sort of Silk Road kind of setup. But it's something fun to sort of add to the game and kind of give them an area where they can kind of show up and do some trade, go to the market, get some information, do that very basic settlement thing. Very interesting. But also, in this specific example we're working with, there's going to be kind of outer buildings kind of attached to it. There's kind of a village that kind of pops up around it, which we can probably assume that places like these caravanserais also have, but we have some outer buildings right here, but most of the time those probably didn't survive because they were not made out of stone, basically. So all these sort of like huts and things like that for supporting staff on the outside are gone. But they are very cool. Let's do that. Gently minimized it on myself. There we go. So yeah, that's sort of the spot that we've got here. And let's keep going with some others. Again, D6. Gotta roll a 1. So 3. 1, 2, 3. So right here we're gonna have something else. Well, what are we gonna have? What's gonna show up here? 3. So I know that off the top of my head is a religious location. And that's also going to have a sort of village attached to it, usually. So 760 people. So again, another pretty sizable village. And we can tell what kind of religious site is this. Let's roll a D8. Find out. 2. Ooh, some sort of cemetery, graveyard, or ossuary. An ossuary, of course, you guys are probably familiar if you've ever seen the sort of weird underground tombs and things like that that have all the human bones like around the walls and things like that. They're constructed out of human skulls and things like that. That's an ossuary. It's basically when you take the people... They would bury people in the cemetery, let them decompose, and then they would dig them up and move their bones into the ossuary, and so they could bury new bodies in the graveyard. Very interesting practice. So, you want an ossuary? Let's just roll a d3. Okay. So this is a grave site, or graveyard of some type. Grave site or graveyard. And we'll go ahead and, for a religious location, we'll grab our little temple and drop that. So it also has a population next to it, attached to it. Let's keep on moving. 1, 2, 3, 5. Okay. Getting quite a few here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And a nice little line. A 12. That is a construction. So this is a construction of a holding. So somebody's making a keep, a manor, something out here for themselves. Let's put that up real quick just to check. Alright, let's do a percentage. Oh, it's like 95. It's nearly finished. So it's about 95% complete. So it's almost done. I've been working on this for a while. Is it? We'll just ask an oracle. Is it currently being worked on? No. Okay. So this could be maybe an abandoned holding, which is very interesting. I like to add constructions. It's another little sort of world building thing that I like to add. Because one of the things that I noticed going through adventure modules, fantasy, things like that, is that we rarely see most things when we come across them are either ruined or they are currently serviceable, but we rarely come across construction projects. So this is just one of the ways to sort of add little verisimilitude, little reality sort of into the mix. Like, hey, they're actively building this. And so you can get an idea of who's building it, what they're building, and why they're building it. And we'll go ahead and add a little icon. We're using a little gear for construction. And keep moving. 2. Just make it a little bit easier for you guys to see. Alright, and 4. So we've got the 4th one down here. 3, 4. Right, we're actually getting quite a few points of interest in this sort of area, which is very surprising. Let's back over here. Just want to make sure that we're quite far away. Yeah. Because this next text that we're about to go into is going to be in the frontier because it gets closer to the capital city. But we roll 1. What is here? 2. Oh, so this is a holding. And it's going to have, again, another village attached to it. The village has to have at least 400 plus people in it. 975. Again, we have some pretty large villages that we've come across this far. In this session of sort of world building things up. Kind of interesting. And we can determine sort of how fortified it is. 2. Okay, so it's just a keep. And we're saying keep, but that doesn't necessarily mean a keep. It could be like a peel tower. It could be just a fortified manor house. But I just use keep for my own knowledge, just going in. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a stone keep. It could be a peel tower, which is pretty much a stone keep, like a tower house. But it could also just be sort of like a manor house that has a bailey around this sort of courtyard and sort of a fortified gate entrance. One thing that we do know, and why I sort of roll for it, is that it will tell us usually the amount of defenses are going to be commensurate to the amount of danger that place is usually in. So if we have a peel tower just kind of off by itself, it means that, this manor house by itself, maybe isn't the take on the most amount of attacks, right? It's not heavily fortified, it's just lightly fortified. So enough that it's defensible, but not enough that necessarily has to hold a bunch of sieges, right? We don't have a bunch of ramparts and towers and defensive gatehouses and things like that. And we'll add first this means that we need to add our little shield, so there's probably a noble that lives here, but it could be some sort of fighting order or something else. And we'll keep moving. Right back to it. Again, in this sort of like a swamp, wetlands area. 18. Oh, right. Which is a landmark or wonder of some type. Roll a d6. Again, this is wild, so it's probably going to be... check. Alright, so something weird. And that's just letting me know that it's, So I like to... mean that this landmark here that's here, this wonder, is actually something weird. It's actually something that's related to some sort of aberration, so it's something from a different plane. So we're adding a little weirdness into the mix. So this is not a natural landmark, and it's not like a man-made one. It's not like an obelisk or like an arch or something like that, a statue, a fountain, something like that that's sort of in the middle of nowhere. This is some sort of aberrant extraplanar weirdness. Don't know what that is yet. I'm not going to focus on that right now. Just know that it is something weird. And it is used as sort of a travel landmark. Like, hey, if you come across this thing, you know where you are. Because it stands out. So let's go ahead and add here. So for our landmarks, we're using this little guy right here. Drop that down in here. Now, we do need to figure out whether somebody's here. Do that down here. And whether that's right. So let's roll a d6. Alright, so it's unoccupied. So unlike the last one we rolled, there's not any monsters here, so it's empty. But there also aren't any people living here. So it's definitely just sort of a landmark for overland travel. Which is really useful for the way that I tend to run overland travel, where we don't focus on the map, we use what's called an itinerary, which is basically a list of directions. So if you've ever played the old Oregon Trail video game, you'll come across these two where they have like landmarks, like, hey, you hit this fort, hey, you hit this specific rock, hey, you hit this sort of landmarks that tell you where you are and where you need to go from there, because maps not particularly a thing, especially accurate maps. So instead, people just kind of give you basic directions the way that you would give somebody driving directions, rather than give them a map. Got that one. Let's keep moving on. Oops. Screw that up. 2. And 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, quite a few in this hex. Went through around there where we were doing like 10, 20 even hexes without anything, and now we're hitting a hex every much closer to sort of like every 4 hexes or so. Rolling 1. So a little bit different. That's good. 10. Omen or warning. Some sort of omen or warning. What kind is it? D6. 1. Some sort of boundary notice. Again, that just tells you what sort of lands you're entering or leaving. And again, we use our information sign for that stamp. On with it. Let's keep going. Fun. Alright. Right here. Again, we're coming across a lot in this specific hex for some reason. Alright, the 16's another treasure room. Let's go down to treasure rumor. It's a D6. Three. Okay, so this is guarded. That could be guarded by, we don't know what kind of creatures. Could be constructs, could be undead, could be armed men, could be goblins. Don't know. Because we don't know what exactly the treasure is. It could be some sort of crypt, it could be a vault, a treasury. It could be a dragon's hoard, the hoard of a dead dragon, something like that. It could be just a dragon's hoard, right? That would be a guarded treasure, right? And it's rumor, so we don't actually know if it's true. That's one of the things that I sort of leave in here, is that with the treasure rumor, you don't necessarily know that it's true. In fact, there's a 1 in 6 chance that it is fake, like it's made up. And somebody's using it to sort of like lure people in. It might be used as an ambush point. To sort of rob people. Which I have used. I have used in games, and it is fun to sort of have somebody be like, hey, you know, these people sort of like lure you into a trap, and then that turns out to be a whole thing. I've also had games where I do that, and the characters don't take the bait, and in fact actually end up having to ask those NPCs for help on something else. Because they sort of know the wilds, and then actually have the people who were going to ambush them have basically a change of heart because of their interactions with the party and the PCs, and actually become friendly towards them. So, very interesting. You can have this NPC that sort of has their own sort of like arc. Which would be very interesting. And we need our little stamp. What are we using for treasure rumor? I want to say it was the lock, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Let's just use the lock for now. That's fine. These don't have to be perfect, they just have to be noticeable enough for me. Like I said, I should actually codify these and actually make it specific things, set for specific things, but I've been lazy and frankly just haven't done that. But that would be very useful. But I do make sure that, right, that's one of the reasons we have this information down here in the bottom, is so I know what this is, even if I don't know what the icon is right off the top of my head. I have probably a vague idea. Well, let's keep moving forward. Okay, right into another one. Slowly but surely. Alright, well, we know this one is a holding for sure. Don't have to look that up. And then, what is the holding? A D8? Let's look, this is D6. 5. Alright, so, much more heavily fortified. And we're going to have to figure out the population that's kind of coming with that, and then we will paste that as plain text. Alright, let's figure that out real quick. Alright, well, it can't be a 1. Still can't be a 1. It'll be a 6 or higher. Alright. 9. Alright. 975 again. What are the odds? About 1 in 600. Alright. Actually, better odds than that, actually. Alright, but we have another keep down here that's on a holding. We got these 2 holdings down here. Very good. So even though these are sort of in the wilds, we definitely gives that appearance that we're moving closer towards that frontier and capital city that's to the northeast. We can definitely see a lot more sort of like human occupation here, or humanoid occupation. keep on moving. Looking for our next point of interest. 4. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So right here in this little forested hills. We have something. 8. An isolated homestead. So I know we're using our little house for that as well. Isolated homestead. Let's roll a d6 for what who the occupant is. 2. A former adventurer. Interesting. Alright, so we have a isolated homestead. This is a not foreign, former. The former adventurer. You want to determine what class they might be? Sure. Let's do that. 12. Well, that's right at the end. So that's a wizard. And APL 11 through 16. So this is a very powerful wizard. This is sort of a mage tower, but not a... because I think mage tower is actually on here. Yeah. So this is a former adventurer that just happens to also be a wizard. But this is sort of like a retired wizard. Not like an actively practicing one. Who's sort of taken up residence by themselves, sort of on the edge of civilization, just kind of hermiting up in their twilight years. Well, we were going to assume twilight years, but we don't know how long they were actually adventuring. But this should be, because it's a wizard of that level, between level 11 and 16 as far as player level is concerned. This is very powerful, probably well-known, or at least sort of legendary-ish for people that are sort of around the area. You probably know this. So certainly the people in these sort of noble holdings that we have are going to know who this person is. But let's keep on moving. 1. We have 5 left, so 3, 4, and the last one. Alright, so that is all the points of interest for this specific hex, which was a ton, by the way. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So almost a third, even though we only had a 1 in 6 chance. So pretty stuffed. Now that's going to change because once we get into this area, which is technically a frontier, or march, so it's sort of on the edge of this sort of civilized hex, which is right next to it to the northeast, right? We have this large capital city that's got, I have not decided how many people are in this capital city yet. Either of these. That's fine. It's going to have at least 60,000 people in it. That's all we need to know. So a very large city, like an iconic city. It's a New York, it's a Paris, it's a Tokyo, it's a Rio de Janeiro, right? It's a very large city. Like, well known. Most people in the world are know of the city and its general location. Even if they've never been there, they might not know anything about it other than it exists. But since we're on the frontier here, that means that instead, we're going to roll those 1d6s, but instead of rolling just a 1, now we can roll a 1, 2, or 3. So there's a 50% chance that something's going to show up here. Now that will change, obviously, once we get into these water hexes. But these sort of coastal ocean hexes, that'll change. But for now, that's what it's going to be. Which I must have, maybe I was rolling 1d20. I cannot remember. Actually, I think I was proofing it, is what I was doing. think I was rolling 1d10 just to assume that there was the chance of something was going to be there. If I'm being honest. Which is, we'll get there. We'll do that next. But when we get there, we'll take a look at it. But first, let's take a look down here. Again, if you guys have any specific questions, just drop them in. We'll take a look at them. Creating a session 0 is the next. Nope. Sorry. Be flexible. That was the next one. Getting ahead of myself. Yeah. Be flexible. So it talks about players are unpredictable, right? They're not going to follow your planned path. Be ready to adapt and improvise when needed. Yep, it's a huge part about DMing. And there's not really a ton of advice, specific advice to give you, because each instance, given its nature, is going to be different. But improvising is something you'll need to do. That's why earlier I was talking about it's so important to be able to know the basics of the game, so that way that's going to give you the tools in your toolbox to be able to improvise and be flexible. So I think probably the biggest sort of single piece of advice is, and I talked about this before, is don't take your game too seriously. Like I said, there's a lot of sort of like specifically new dungeon masters who sort of get into the hobby and want to tell like these very grand stories, very grand, take the world very seriously. But the truth is that the players usually don't take the game that serious. Like you know it. You've probably watched some of the actual plays, like Critical Role and stuff like that, right there. The players do plenty of dumb stuff. Their player characters are silly. They do stuff. So relax. Don't take it that seriously. Just let the game sort of be what the game's going to be. Now, that said, it doesn't mean don't ever take the game seriously. It's just don't be upset when try not to be upset when your players want to do silly stuff in the game. Because you have to think of it sort of on that meta level. So that sometimes people are playing D&D because it's a game, because they want to have fun, right? They want to hang out with their friends, have some fun, and be silly, and do the sort of things that you'd never actually be able to do in real life, right? Right, the part of the strength of role-playing in general is it gives you a form in which you can do things, you can try things that don't have real-world consequences, things you couldn't do in real life. Like, that's part of the power of fantasy, that's part of the fun of it. So let them also enjoy that aspect of the game. That's part of the game. So you have to be flexible with that. Let them do that. And also, being flexible is about one of the things. I don't want to say that. So basically, this talks about them not following your planned path. I would say that having a planned path is not the greatest idea in the world. Because the truth is that, and that's one of the problems that I have with a lot of these sort of like large published modules, things that are put out by sort of Paizo and Dungeons and Dragons, the actual brand, first party sort of adventures, Curse of Strahd, even Curse of Strahd, things like that are well regarded, is that it only takes like one little change to send a planned adventure completely off its path. So instead of setting up sort of these set pieces that's sort of like plot points that's like A, B, C, D, E, I try to reframe things, creating obstacles, right? They have a goal. Most adventures have a pretty clear goal of what the players and their characters are trying to accomplish. And usually the villains have a pretty clear goal about what they're trying to accomplish. And right where those things intersect is where the conflict happens. That's what the adventure is. And so if I focus on putting obstacles in front of the players, it doesn't matter how they get around the obstacle. They can decide to completely go around it, they can go through it, they can go over it, they can go under it. The point is that they have to engage with it in some way. And I don't care which way. Part of the problem with having a planned adventure is that you're creating a problem that has a singular solution most of the time. And the moment that you don't get that clear solution because the players have decided to do something else that a module can never be able to account for, that's why it requires a human to run the game, then the adventure can fall apart pretty easily. So instead I kind of focus on trying to give them obstacles. Like, these are challenges, you need to figure out how to get around it. There's a big difference between, here's a combat encounter, you have to kill these guys so that way you can get the note that's in their pocket that's going to tell you about... it's going to give you the key that's in the guy's pocket to be able to open the door that's not pickable, that the rogue can't pick. You have to have this key, so you have to have this combat encounter. Well, I mean, what if we wait till they're asleep and we steal it out of their pocket? Then we have the key, but then we can kill the people, so do the people show up to get us? Do they wake up? Do I force the combat by making the guy wake up to attack you when you try to steal the key? Because that's kind of lame. So instead of just having an obstacle, there's a door that needs a key, but still being able to be like, oh, well, the rogue could potentially try to pick it, but while they're picking it, there's always the chance that some bad guys are going to run across you, because it's going to be a very involved lockpicking session. It's not a one and done. It's like, oh, you're going to take multiple rounds to do this. This is something that might take you, it's a very complicated mechanism that you're not familiar with. It might take you 10-15 minutes, and you guys are just standing in a dungeon passageway while that happens. So the likelihood that monsters, bad guys are going to run across you really ramps up, and that creates tension, and that's a better game than being like, no, you can't unlock this door, which is very video game logic when you have things like Fallout games or Elder Scrolls where they're like, oh, nope, this lock can't be picked. And it's like, but I have a lock picking skill. Why are there locks that I can't pick then? Right, it doesn't really make sense. So, yeah. My idea is to be flexible, let the players and you together are going to sort of organically come up with the story that is the game that you talk about later. Through your sort of memory of a shared experience that is the play. And not worry too much about, like, you prescriptively trying to write a story for them to experience, if that makes sense. But, yeah, let's jump back in, and we'll keep going. Now, again, we're entering that frontier hex, so we have to roll a 1 through 3 instead of just a 1 on the d6. And I got ahead of myself. That's okay. I'll just knock this off. I forgot. I said it, and then I immediately forgot that I wasn't trying to roll a 1. Alright, so we've got something here. We've got an 11, which is some sort of natural resource, which I think we were also using the gear icon for. I'm trying to remember. I think we were using the gear icon for that. So we'll continue using the gear icon. Or were we using the clover? I'm going to say the gear, just in case. So we're going to have some sort of natural resource here. And we need to know what kind of type of natural resource. Alright, so it's some sort of permanent operation. And so we're talking in very, very broad terms when we're talking about natural resource. Basically, this is an area that doesn't have, or that might have, it could be some sort of mine or quarry, but it could also be something like an aqueduct, right? It could be anything like that. It could be lumber, right? Probably lumber because we're in the middle of a forest next to a river that kind of goes through here. So probably lumber, because that makes it very easy to transport the lumber by having a river right there. But we don't know that for sure, and I'm not worried about it right now. I just know that it's a permanent operation. Now, I'm trying to remember. Do I want to do that? I want to attach a... I don't think so. No, I'm not going to do that. Alright. I was going to decide whether I want to attach maybe sort of like a village to that, but I don't think so. I think we're just going to leave this. This is a permanent operation, so it might be like a... Like, it could be a lumber camp, so there's, like, actual buildings here. Probably, like, hewn logs. They're turned into sort of like a lodge, and there's dormitories and things like that. So it kind of functions like a settlement, but it's not a settlement in its own right. But is a more sort of permanent forestry operation, if it ends up being that. It could also, again, be a quarry, a mine. It could be an aqueduct. Probably not an aqueduct, but could be. Alright, let's keep moving forward. 3. Alright, we got another one. Confirming that, yeah. 1. Oh, so we actually run across our first actual city. At least for this session of doing this on the stream. So we have a city. So cities have, like I said, up to 60,000. Alright, so this city is going to have 6,000 people now. So a smaller city, for sure. But it does make sense. So, so again, if we look at sort of like where this capital city is, and granted we haven't done these yet, we can tell basically how far apart these cities are. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're about 7 away at about an average of 65, which is what off the top of my head? 455 nautical miles away, which is about 525 miles. So, you know, pretty far apart between sort of this very major city and the city. And again, we don't know. There may be more cities that are interspersed in here. And there's certainly going to be all sorts of smaller settlements as well. But the city's also probably going to have some sort of lord over it. And let's see, is there anything we need to roll for cities? I think so. No. Not at this point. Let's just keep on moving. There we go. We rolled a 3. That means there's another one here. 15. Which is a no trespassing area. Interesting. I'm trying to no trespassing area. Or is that what we were using the block for? No. What do we put down here for no trespassing area? I guess we'll use the luck. That's fine. We can use the luck. Really makes the most amount of sense. And then we can kind of determine what kind of why we're not supposed to be here. So it's a D6. And we rolled a 5. So it's some sort of private reserve. So it means it's like a king's wood, like a king's forest, something like that. That's probably got a forester in it. Like, you are not supposed to be in here, you're not supposed to be hunting in here, cultivating that, chopping down any trees, anything like that. Like, this is some sort of noble, some sort of authority has decided that, hey, this area, off limits. And that might be from this holding over here, that might be from the city. Like, again, it could be the king, so there might be a royal forester who's sort of in charge of this area. But let's keep moving. One. There. Not here, but here. And an 18. Right, which is the landmark. Inform or wonder. I think we were doing types for this, right? I believe. Now we are in the marches, which means, okay, so it's artificial. And we need to roll again to see if anybody's here. Marches, so it is occupied. Which means there's basically a village here. Pretty small village, it looks like. 460 people. So again, like, it's an artificial landform or landmark. So it might be like an obelisk again, some sort of what are they called? Stele, right? Something like that. Sort of marker. Could be a lot of different things. It might be a statue. Again, might be a fountain. Could be any number of things. But we'll go ahead and add this little stamp and keep moving on. Keep doing what we've been doing. Alright, got another one right in the next one. Again, like I said, once we enter sort of that frontier marches area, about 50% of this place is going to be, should be occupied with points of interest. So it's what I would consider the richest environment for D&D style adventures, which there's close enough sort of civilization that's around, but at the same time, there's enough sort of wild things, monsters and things that are kind of going on, that there's plenty of sights. Once you start getting out into the wilds, you're going to run into more monsters, but there's not going to be as many sort of villages, cities, things like that, points of civilization for you the players to sort of, and the party to sort of get to. So there, you have to have some longer sort of overland exploration elements that kind of go on, which is a very different kind of aspect of the game than you might want to focus on. So I definitely like sort of the frontier marches area because it's got the most density of adventure without it being too political, which happens when you get into sort of more civilized areas like we're going to have to the northeast, but also not just totally weird stuff, which is going to happen once you get into the wilds by itself. So it's got a good mix of kind of everything. Alright, so 5 is another crossing. We have some sort of crossing here, so a bridge or something. And that does mean that there's going to be a village attached to it. Let's go. 955 people. And let's see, is this thing going to be told or not? Let's go find our crossing. Alright, so we are in the marches, so there's a 50% chance. Alright, it is not manned or told. And seems to be in decent repair. So basing it where we are, this could be some sort of ferry. It could be, right, we have this sort of water establishment right here, which we don't know if this is going to be coastal at this point or if this is going to be sort of freshwater. Don't really know that right off the top of our mapping at this level. We'll have to get into a little bit more detail before we find out, because we have wetlands attached to it, which is also attached to the ocean. So we don't know if this is going to be freshwater or saltwater, or some sort of brackish, something in between. But, let's see. That's where I was, right? No, it was right here. We're crossing. So let's go ahead and plop something down to show it's a crossing. What should we do for that? What did we do previously for crossing? Is that what we used the star for? I believe that's what we used the star for. No. We're gonna use the water. I think I used the water. Boop. So we'll add that in, and then we will keep on rolling. Filling in these points of interest. Another point of interest, right off the bat. Here we go. It's 11. That is some sort of natural resource. So we'll go ahead and put our gear down there. Go ahead and add that in. Of course, if you guys have questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the chat, but otherwise, once we hit going through this larger hex, we will stop and talk about some other D&D stuff. It's sort of a little mini break for us. And we are doing a natural resource. Did I go too far? Yes, I did. I am blinking. I'm looking at it. Beacon, crossing, monument, meeting place, monster lair. There we go. Natural resource. Roll a d4 for us. 2. Okay, so it's semi-permanent operation, so some sort of park camp. Again, we don't know what the resource is at this time. I'm not really that focused on it. And this is going to be semi-permanent. So, like a park camp. So, they could be cutting peat. They could be pulling bog iron. They could be doing a lot of things. There could be some sort of polder. Since we're in sort of a wetlands area that they're trying to mess with. Trying to reclaim some farmland. I don't really know at this point. And I don't try to focus in that much detail on those things until I get to the point where we're actually going to do some adventure in the game, the D&D. Until then, I'm going to leave it very loosey-goosey. Let it be whatever it needs to be for the game. And we'll keep moving. So we're going to have two here that don't have anything, and then this sort of dense wooded area. We are going to have something. What are we going to have? What's our point of interest down here? 15. Oh, another no trespassing area. Now, I believe we were using the lock for that, so let's go ahead and put the lock right there. And go down to our no trespassing area, which is right here. Let's roll a d6. Gonna give us some insight about what exactly is the reason. Alright, so it's a hillfolk tribal lands. So hillfolk is just sort of like a generic term that I use for people who basically live on the edges of society. Sort of hillbilly, but not in a derogatory way, sort of Bedouin, people who are potentially pastoral, they might be semi-nomadic, but anyways, this is sort of like their area, and if you go in here, right, this is barbarian lands, if you go into this area, you're going to have to deal with them, and they're not going to be happy with you there, probably. But there are opportunities for communication, for trade, for getting to know them, maybe be able to find helpful NPCs or information you might otherwise not be able to get for the players. There might be reasons that the players want to interact with these people and visit this area. Or it might have an adventure location within it. And if that's the case, then you might have to negotiate with them. All sorts of fun stuff. Keep on moving. Alright, right in the next one. You know, there's going to be a lot of them in this area. I think we're quite above the average right here, right now. We've got more points of interest than not points of interest. And 9, which is information signage. So some sort of signage is in this area. And what type of signage? D6. 5. Okay, so grave marker. So very interesting. So there might be... Now obviously we're looking at the region level, so this is pretty... It could be a weird sort of mausoleum or burial mound that's sort of out in the middle of nowhere for people to come across. But it's also, right, has a pretty substantial marker. It might be... Information signage could also include... I don't think that's on the list. Is it on the list? No. It could be things like petroglyphs, things like that. It could be a large sort of like, signs that are made out of rocks that are carved into the ground, things of that nature. They kind of set it off. Decoration and communication. And again, like directional signage, it's going to give you a good idea of where you are based off of that, because that's going to be something that people are going to notice, and it's going to be a point of reference for traveling around the world. Or traveling around at least this area of the world. And we'll move on to the next one. Alright, nothing there. Then we have this one, right on the edge here of our coast. It's going to be in here. 7. Another meeting place. Again, meeting places are sort of like outdoor areas for people to get together. We talked about that a little bit earlier when we first came across the meeting place in the stream, but just to reiterate, a meeting place, most buildings at the time period are relatively small and narrow. You can't really fit a lot of people in there, so if you're wanting to do things like hold like town hall meetings kind of things, sort of large courts, things of that nature, you're probably going to have to do that outside somewhere. So you kind of pick very specific locations. That's typically what they did. They had good sight lines or were culturally important to the area, and you would choose those places to do it. So this is a meeting place. Is there any roles for meeting places? I think there is. Yeah. Because it could be something else. And I really need to add an extra 6 there. That's alright. You just got 5. Alright, so it is a tribal moot location. Which makes sense, since we have these hillfolk tribal lands that are relatively close. So this might be an area that sort of they meet with other people as sort of a neutral ground to discuss things. And this is... What are we doing for meeting places? And... I think star is what we're doing for meeting places, so let's drop that in. Go, that's our location. And keep on moving down. Is there going to be anything at the volcano? Because we've got a volcano here. Nope, nothing at the volcano. What's something next to the volcano? Not there, but in this hilled area, we have another crossing. So this might be a pass of some type. This is in the hills. But it also comes with a population that's going to have a village attached to it. Okay, one second for that. So this can be 745 people. 745 people right there. Perfect. We'll knock that out. And let's get some extra information about the crossing. At this point. Crossing. There we go. Is it manned or told? 1 through 3. Alright, well it's not manned. Is it in disrepair? Alright, so it is free and functional. And we don't really need to know anything else about it at this point. Not even what it is. It could be a guide station. It could be... maybe there's a gorge or something that's got a bridge across it. Something like that. Suspension bridge. You kind of need to cross. Like a ravine or something of that nature. We do need to put down our little stamp. And crossing. Put our little water stamp. There. There's our shorthand for it. That's good. Let's keep on, keep on. Alright. D6. The D6. Nothing there, but something here. 20! Which means it's a hazard. 20 is always a hazard. What's the nature of this hazard? It's gonna be an artificial hazard. So an artificial hazard we might, in modern day, might call something like an old minefield or something like that. Got unexploded munitions on it, but as far as it's kind of going on with ours, let's take a look. Let's see if there's anything here. No, it can't be 6. It has to be a 5. 4. Alright, some sort of fauna. So, it's artificial, but it's also fauna. So it's some sort of like humanoid introduced animal that's maybe not, that's dangerous, that's maybe not native to the area. So it might be some sort of predator that's usually not in this area, and so it's kind of causing a ruckus. It's not something you want to hear. Be interesting. This would be a good place to throw in. Those if you're running sort of a 5e campaign, might be one of the areas where you want to throw in something weird, like this is where a dinosaur shows up, right? Not natural to this area, and it's like absolutely devastating the ecosystem. But also you don't want to hang out there because there's a weird. But artificial fauna could also just mean an owlbear. Probably higher than an owlbear. I don't know what's a CR for an owlbear. I don't think it's going to be a high enough CR. Yeah, they're only CR3. So, it would have to be something... I mean, it could be a bunch of owlbears, I guess. But which already tells you exactly the sort of adventure you could have in there. So here, I'll even write in here. Owlbear were similar? Question mark? Just as a note for myself later when I'm using it. Be like, oh, right. It could be owlbears. As an artificial fauna, right? A man-made monster. But artificial fauna could be a construct gone wild, could be undead, could be all sorts of weird stuff. And this is a hazard. What do we do for hazards? What do we have for hazards? That makes sense. Maybe this little bell, right? That's sort of a warning thing. We'll use this little bell. We'll add that in, and let's move on. All right. And so nothing in this hex, nothing in this hex, but we did look at this hex. 14. Which is conflict area. Well, we know what stamp to put down there. That's this guy. Crossed weapons over the shield. Let's find out some more about our conflict area. Conflict. There it is. D4 right here. Alright, so pre-done. So again, this might be like a camp. It could be a battlefield or a prospective battlefield. In the marsh, it's probably a camp, but we don't know for certain, and I don't really care to know right now to pin that down. Depending on what game I'm playing and what sort of notes I might drop into that, it would definitely, that's how I would make that decision. Right, it feels very much like Alfred and his sort of refugee camp that's out in the marshes, in the fens, in Wessex, but we don't know right now, and we don't need to figure that out. We don't even know who the opposition forces are, who the belligerents are. Doesn't really matter at this point. We just know that when the players get there, there's prospectively going to be a battle that's about to happen that they're gearing up for. It feels very much like if you play The Witcher 3, the Nilfgaard camp. Right, you find their war camp and you can do some quests out of there and talk to some people. But right, it's just a camp before the fight, right? They're entrenched there. Alright, keep on moving on. Okay. Alright, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Nothing happened to those because we didn't roll a 1 through 3. And then right here we did. Finally rolled a 3. So what do we got right here? 14. No, oh right, that's another conflict area. Kind of showing up together, right next to each other. Very interesting. What type of conflict area is this? The first one. It's very similar to the last one. So these might be the two opposing camps that are next to each other. I mean, I'm gonna say next to each other is a very loose term. This might be sort of like winter camps instead. Winter bivouacs camps. But they hold down for the off season. Yeah. So absolutely. So we don't know who that is, but this might be our opposing parties. Hey there. How are you? So yeah, these might be our sort of like belligerents at this point. We're gonna keep on moving, and we're gonna do and let's get down and find out what's going on in some of these other areas. Oh, yep, we're gonna go right into another one. There we go. And we rolled an 11, which is another natural resource. So we know that's gonna be our little gear icon. Drop down that right there. Kind of determine, I believe it's a D6, if I remember correctly. Travel, crossing monuments, meeting place, monster, natural. Oh, it's a D4. Alright, and then I'll roll a D6 on top of that. This could be unworked, undiscovered, or abandoned. This can be an abandoned natural resource site. So that's just a straight up adventure location. Whoever kind of jumps in there, we're going to find out, exactly what they're looking for. So go in there and we will put do that, and let's move on from that. Another D6. Alright, got another one. Knew there were going to be a bunch. And they are a bunch. That's another conflict area, right? Yep. Really heavy on the 14s right now. Really heavy on it. But that's okay. So, another conflict area. So, a lot of conflict kind of going on in this general area. Don't know what that is, what that's about yet, but we know that there's a lot of it. Now, is this also going to be a pre-battle camp? That'll be very interesting, if that's the case. Oops, it's a D4, it's not D6. I know that. one, yeah, it is, right? It's a pre-battle. Interesting. So again, this could be another camp. So we might have, it's like a 3-army sort of squabble that's going on. This might be, it feels like at this point that this is in fact probably a pretty major conflict at this time. It's going to be sort of like certainly a fight of some measure. Probably going to be some sort of war of some type that's kind of going on. If we have this many sort of conflict areas of this scale, which is pretty sizable scale. This is certainly at kingdom scale, pretty much. So there's going to be important conflicts that are going on here. When we get to it in the game, if it ever shows up in the game, it'll be a very interesting sort of aspect for us to sort of dive into and figure out a lot more about who and what and why. I'm filling out our hexes. Oh, got one right here. And that's a 4, which is another travel haven. And of course, because it's a travel haven, there is going to be a village attached to it. So we're going to need a population for that. Let's figure out what that is real quick. Can't be a 10. So 8. 805 people. Pretty sizable village. And we can find out, let's find out a little bit more about our travel haven. Let's find out. Let's do a D4. It's an inn. Straight up. So it's Traveler Inn. Kind of on the kind of in a little bit kind of in nowhere, but not super nowhere. Kind of on the fringes of civilization, right? We're on the frontier, and definitely along sort of like a coastal area. So it's a good place for an inn. It makes sense. And then we've been using a little house icon for these guys, for these sort of travel areas. So we're gonna go ahead and do that, and then we will jump back in and do that. We are almost done with this hex. And nothing in that hex. Nothing in that hex. And nothing in the last hex. So we finished out this entire larger hex, which is good. So knock those out. Perfect. Excellent. So, as we saw, I think how many did we actually end up with? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Which, yeah, that tracks. That's about half. So I know there's 31 little hexes inside each of these larger hexes. So we did a pretty good job there of knocking it out. So we knew there was a 50% chance that point of interest was going to show up. And the statistics bared that out. So that's great. So next, I want to finish, I think for this stream, my intent is we'll finish off these last 2 hexes. They should go probably pretty quickly because they are water hexes, even though they are technically these are going to be frontier hexes, but we'll have to proof that out with our 1d10. So we'll have to double check each of those, which is fine. And of course we're still going to look at that D&D advice, but real quickly I'm going to take a short break and refill up on my tea, and then we'll jump back into it. So I will be back in just a minute, guys, and then we'll knock this out, knock out the last little bit of the stream, and that'll be it for me today. But we'll see you back in just a few minutes. All right, bye. let's hop back in. Time to look at questions. Oop, there we go. Real quick. So we talked about being flexible, so now we're going to take a look at creating session 0. How important do you think a session 0 is? I think that depends a lot on who you're playing with. I think if you're playing with a whole bunch of strangers, people you've never played with before, and you're getting ready to run a game for them, my question would be, like, are you trying to run a one-shot or like a limited adventure, or an already published module that people are going to be familiar with, something like that? Then I don't think a session 0 is that important, because the expectations for what the campaign is going to be about is going to be pretty clear by its nature. Like, even if you're running a homebrew adventure, but you're only going to run like a one-shot or limited, maybe it's up to like 5 sessions of a game, and that's all the scope that you're planning for, then I'm not sure a session 0 is that important, because you should be able to pretty concisely tell potential players with the elevator pitch what that game's going to be about. So I don't think it's as necessary. Similarly, if you're playing with people that you've played with for a long time, like if you're going to run a new game for your regular group that maybe you've been playing with for months, if not years, maybe even longer, maybe even decades, as some people do, right? Some people have very consistent gaming groups they've been playing with for decades. Then you probably don't need a session 0, because you have a good idea of your players and who they are and what they like out of the game and what they want to play, and they, as well, probably have a pretty good idea of your Dungeon Master style, your DMing style, the type of games you like to run, and what you're interested in running. So unless you're going to deviate from that, because you're wanting to try something new out, again, in both those instances, you probably don't really need a session 0. So a session 0 really has this very surprisingly narrow time in which it's actually super kind of useful, which is you're either trying to run a new campaign for people you don't know, or you're trying something very, very different with people you do know, if that makes sense. So in the times when I use session 0s, it's more like maybe that I have a group that I've played with some of the people, but maybe not everybody in the group, and I want a better idea of what they're looking for out of the game, especially from those strangers, because I'm making a game homebrew, and so they have no idea what to expect from the game. So I have to tell them what to expect from the game to see if the type of player they are and is going to match up with the type of game I want to run, and to ensure that they make characters that make sense for that game, right? Because I don't necessarily need to do that with a group that I've played with for a long time. Unless, like I said, unless I'm going to do something weird and different. Like if usually we play a whole bunch of dungeon delves, and now I'm like, oh, well, I really have this idea for this sort of merchant, sort of Marco Polo kind of campaign that's going to be really different than what we've run before. So I want to do a session 0 so everybody understands sort of like what the campaign tone is, what it's going to be about, what sort of different house rules we're going to use for overland travel and things like that. And to ensure that they make characters that make sense for that game, right? And that everybody's happy with what's going to show up during that game. That's also their part to their time to put my players to put input into what they want to see out of the campaign and what they don't want to see out of the campaign. So yeah, I think creating a session 0 is pretty important, but it's has been my experience that it's surprisingly narrow as to when I actually need to run a session 0. Otherwise, I just need to craft a pretty good elevator pitch and take the time to have conversations with prospective players that are strangers to me, that I don't know, that I haven't played with before, so I don't know their style and what they're looking for out of the game. So that way, I'm, like we talked about earlier, communication being key and making sure that I've collected the right group of players to set the game that I want to run up for success. So if I'm doing that, then I don't... if I've already done that work, then I don't really need to have the session 0. So, but yeah, no, I think session 0s are good. I do think that people are sometimes quick to throw that out as something you have to do all the time, and it's been my experience, you know, playing in a bunch of different groups with a bunch of different people over many, many years, is that once you play with people for a while, you kind of understand their tendencies and what they're looking for out of the game. Unless they're not very good at communicating that, if there's something specific they point out of the game that hasn't shown up in a game, then you might want to ask them about that. That would be one thing that having a session 0 for an already established group might bring up that you might otherwise miss. But otherwise, yeah, I think you can forego doing a session 0 in a lot of circumstances. As long as you still have to make a rock solid sort of elevator pitch for the campaign that you want to run. Like, hey, I want to run this very specific type of campaign. It's going to be this urban crawl that deals with street gangs and sort of like underworld activities, and this is what it is. So if I can make that good pitch, then people are going to know what sort of characters to make for that, and they're going to have pretty clear expectations for the tone of the campaign and what's going to go on. And again, I also have to tell them about any sort of like homebrew changes or house rules or things that I'm going to do. But that doesn't really, I don't really need to waste an entire game session to go over that in person with each person, with the entire group, in most circumstances. Alright, yeah, that's all I sort of have to say about that specifically. Session 0's great. Sometimes maybe overprescribed, depending on what you want out of your game. Alright, so we have these last 2 water hexes. That's what we're going to do on these ocean hexes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to proof them with a 1d10, and once I hit the 1d10, which is probably what I should have done over here, but that's okay. I'll proof them, and once they prove, then they've got 50% of each proving being an actual POI. Let's just start rolling until we roll a 1. There we go. Probably not going to be a lot of them. By design. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then for this number 6, we gotta roll our standard 1d6. 1. Okay, so there is a point of interest here. And it is a frontier, so d20. Alright, so it's gonna be a treasure rumor. Love it. Love waterborne treasure rumors, because it's very easy to add things like shipwrecks to. It's very, very good. Rumor, do we have any rolls for treasure roll? Yeah, it's a d6 roll, I believe. Sure is. 5. Okay, so it's hard to reach. Probably shipwreck then. Right, which means it might be deep, in some deep water, which means it's really difficult to get to. And let's go ahead and for this, we're going to put a little question mark down here. It's something they need to investigate. It's a rumor. That's the important part, is it's a rumor. Back to our d10s. Gotta roll a 1. Oh, there it was. Alright, so 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we gotta roll our d6. Alright, so we do have POI here. What is it gonna be? 18. Denmark Lamp or Wonder. And we can roll a d6 to determine what type. Another artificial one. And then, is anybody here? 1, I believe that means it is occupied. Yep. it's got a monster in it. Now, because when we say monster occupied, I didn't talk about this earlier, but we talked about the owlbear being too low. This is for, so we are looking at the region Texas, which is an average party level between 11 to 16, so our tier 3 adventures. But because the monster is not the focus of it, right, the landmark is, it means that their CR is probably going to be one level lower, so it's probably in the APL 5 to 10 range as far as difficulty goes, generally. So I'll go ahead and add that note. I didn't add the other ones, but that's pretty implicit. I'll know that. That's why it's focused on being a landmark rather than a monster layer, which is something that can come up. It just hasn't come up yet. And we need our little waterfall icon. We go here. So it could be some sort of coral reef. It could be lots of sort of things that are in the water. Maybe have some sort of nasty aquatic monsters in there. Let's keep on moving. Again, gotta roll a 1. There's the 1. But unfortunately, we did not roll a 1, 2, or 3. So we'll keep moving. So we proofed it, but there was nothing there. Alright. It's 10. Up. 10. Got us. It's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So is there anything in this text? I wish there was an easier way to just erase all this. There's not, as far as I know. 1 to 3? Indeed. What's here? Alright, there's a 6. Oh, speaking of monster lair, this is a monster lair. So we'll go ahead and have that. So I use this nice little dragon. One step back. There we go. This is the monster lair. And this is average party level 11 to 16. So a pretty potent monster that's going to be well known. Some sort of sea serpent that hangs out there. I think that's still too low for a dragon turtle. Might be pretty close for a dragon turtle. Something like that. That's the sort of realm of power that we're talking about. So a pretty well-known monster. What I need to know. Clear. So we know that that's going to be somewhere between the CR and 12 to 19. Again, there's some flexibility in there because the CR system for solo is not great. So that's why I started using APL instead. Obviously this is an older list, it's just got more information in it, which is why we're using it. Alright, yeah, is it a complex, information, or vault? Vault. Which means there's probably not going to be a population center attached to it. And we can determine what kind of threat it is. 6, which is weird, for certain. I'm looking at the little sheet, my little cheat sheet. And let's roll a d20. It'll give us our subtype. 5. Oh, aberration again. So there is something strange and otherworldly near it. Now, it's important to remember, so this is why I try not to go into too much detail, is because we're looking at this, and if we look at this hex specifically, there is clearly no land there. But we're at such a zoomed out level that there might be some smaller islands in here. So I don't want to say specifically that it's an underwater monster, because I don't know that yet. But in all likelihood, it will be an underwater monster. So it might be an underwater aberration. I mean, the thing that immediately jumps to mind for that is obviously an aboleth, right? You have those, the iconic underwater aberration. But it could be something else. I might make a custom monster for it. We don't know. And I won't make that decision until it sort of like comes up in the game. Keep it nice and vague, and then I'll change it as needed. Fill in the blanks as we go. Alright, we need to proof some more. We don't have that many left. We have 8 left, right? 5, 6, 7, 8, yeah. Gotta roll a 1. Nope. Well, I'll keep them. I rolled 2 rolls. 2 ones in a row. So, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's proof them. Gotta roll a 1 through 3. Alright, so that'll be 1. There'll be 1 at the other. Yeah. Alright, so both of these next 2 hexes will in fact have a point of interest in them. Alright, 2. So that means it is a holding. So we'll go ahead and drop our little shield down here. Which means it is going to have a population. And the population is going to be a village size, so somewhere between 400 and 1,000. That's not going to work. And... Alright, so about 410 people. Now, again, this is in the sea. Don't know if there's going to be an island there. If there's not an island there, it's going to be some sort of aquatic race. It's going to be tritons, sea elves, something of that nature. Some sort of civilized race that's going to live underwater. Or it could be a monstrous race. I can always make that determination later and decide that it's some sort of monstrous race. They're just not aggressive monsters. So it's not a monster lair, it's not a dungeon, it's just a place that monsters cohabitated. And let's roll for... What's going on down here? 4. And we can actually use that. It's not right there. So we have this guy right here. We'll go ahead and post that as plaintext. So there's a somewhat fortified area here. Now, obviously, a ditch or a moat or palisade is not going to make that much sense if this ends up being underwater, but it'll give me an idea of how fortified that area should be underwater. Which is kind of the point. Kind of gives me a general sense. Now, we know there's something in the next hex as well. Which is going to be a 12. Which is going to be... Oh, a construction. What are we making? Oh, we're building a religious site. And I think it makes sense for there already to be... does it make sense for there already to be a village here? Let's leave it up to the winds of fate. So yes or no? Okay, so there's not a village here currently. So, but we will go ahead and put our stamp down here. We'll grab our temple. A little temple that's in the process of being built. Or actually, that's not true. We were using the gears. Let's add the gear instead. What happened to my information? Dang it. Hey, what is that? Did I? No, I did. Well, that's unfortunate. We're gonna have to re-put those notes back in, I guess. One of the unfortunate things about dealing with sort of the web-only interface. But that's alright, we know that it is a building. It was 405, I think? 405? 410. Let's go with 405. And it had... And this was a construction. and it is a religious site. And what are they building? We can figure that out. D8. 3. Some sort of shrine or temple. Probably a temple. Let's double check. But probably going to be a temple. So roll a 1 or 2. Yeah. So they're making some sort of temple here, just off the coast. Very interesting. And we've got 4 hexes left. So let's proof those. And none of them passed. So everything else down here is nothing. A whole lot of nothing. And then we'll have one more hex, and then we'll call it quits for this stream. But before we do that, we have one more piece of information. Obviously, if you guys have any specific questions, drop them into the chat. Otherwise, we'll just kind of keep going with what we've been working off of. So, building a collaborative story, which is the next one. So, involving what it says is build a collaborative story, involve players in the world building process, allow them to contribute to the campaign's lore and backstory. I think that's very good advice. I think this depends a lot on your players. I think because I've definitely run into both types of players. And I think you need to know, I think it helps when we talk about having that session, not necessarily session 0, but that communication is key aspect. If you want to do a high amount of collaboration with the players, probably let them know that at the beginning. Because there are players that like it, and there are players that don't like that. And I've definitely played with both. I've definitely played with players who are chomping at the bit, like champing at the bit to jump in and sort of add things to the world, add their own little spin. They want to make sure like pieces of their backstory are represented in the world and all that, and they want to make sure when the spotlight turns to them and the DM asks them for a question about like, hey, would you fill in this little piece of the world, or what this thing's called, or what this NPC's name is, or whatever, and they're like, yeah, I want to do this and this and this, and oh yeah, that guy's name is Sam the Halfling, Samwise the Halfling, and or they're like, yeah, I want to make sure that this tavern's called I don't know, the Feasting Hog or something like that. Those sorts of things. There are players that are definitely like all in on that, and they definitely want to be part of that. And then there are players that are like, oh, they'll be caught like totally off guard if you ask them, and they'll be like, oh, I don't know, or they'll shy away from that. So I think it really depends a lot on your specific players, right, and what they're interested in doing. Like I said, I've played with both. So yeah, the expectation is very important. And it also depends on, you know, how much control over the world do you want to give to the players? Because if you have a very strong image about what the world is that you're playing in the game that you're running, it can create some dissonance if you're like, yeah, but I want them to be involved in it too. But the truth is, it's like, yeah, maybe not, because if you ever ask them to do something and then they name a tavern or a NPC or come up with a backstory element that doesn't fit your world, that makes you go, actually, right, then you kind of, that you're answering that for yourself. Oh, actually, maybe I don't want that much collaboration in this. Maybe I want this to be sort of like my aspect, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. As the sort of dungeon master, the game master, thing of that, one of the joys of it is that you get to play this whole sort of mini-game aspect of Dungeons & Dragons or whatever the tabletop RPG is that you're playing away from the table, right? You get to do this cool, fun world-building stuff. You get to come up with these things and these ideas and all this stuff, right? You get to play this whole other aspect of the game that most players don't get to engage with, right? It's my own little demeaning little part of the game. And it's okay to want that to remain yours, right? As long as you're not doing it to the point where you're doing things like railroading, where you're like, hey, you don't have any, as a player, you don't have any agency in this story or in this campaign or in this world. As long as they're still able to make choices and make impacts and choose what they want to do and how the story kind of goes, you having control over the world building aspect is totally fine. And it's alright, if it's your baby, you can let it be your baby. Just don't let it be your baby, like we said, talked about earlier, about not taking it too seriously, not taking your world too seriously. Don't take it to the point where you hold it in value higher than the players you're playing with, right? At the end of the day, it's a game, and you're enjoying it with your friends, so that's a little bit more important than the world in which that's all taking place. But yeah, collaborative stories, fun. Depends on the player, depends on you and the DM, as DM, where you're going to sort of land along that gauntlet. It's going to make a big difference. You might land very heavy on one side, and you might be right in the middle. It kind of depends. So again, keep that communication open, talk with your players, understand what they want, throw out some testers. I've definitely done that before. And be like, oh, going to the tavern and be like, hey, can you tell me, I don't have a name for this tavern, do you? Can you give me a name for the tavern or the barkeep or something? And then if they freeze up or they're like, oh, I don't know, then I know that maybe that's not a player. If I'm not catching them completely off guard, then maybe this is a player that wants to be told a little bit more of the story rather than create more of the story themselves. Different strokes, different folks, all that good stuff. So let's jump back in and let's do our last hex. Again, another water hex, so we gotta proof them. Let's prove them out. Gotta roll a 1. It's not a 1. Still not a 1. Alright, keep going. We'll find a 1 eventually. I know it's on the die. I'm pretty sure. Okay, we're up to 15. Right? It's 18. 19. 20. Right, that's 20. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 14, 16, 17, 1, 22, 23, 24. Okay, took up to 24. Wow. To proof. And okay, so there is going to be 1, 2. So that's 7, 13, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Right here. So we do have a point of interest there, but we do have to delete all these real quick. Knock these out. This back down to something manageable. There we go. So what is the point of interest here? We rolled a 13. It's a ruin. What type of ruin? Great. A ruined religious site. So I'm going to add a population to this. This doesn't necessarily mean that there are people here, but there is an accompanying village of this size. 790. So a pretty sizable village is kind of coming alongside it. Very interesting. We got our ruined religious site, and do we need to know anything else about the ruin? I don't think so. Oh, right. 3. Alright, so it's active. So active with loot. So active means there's monsters or there's people here. Somebody is here. There are people here. There are creatures to interact with. And it is not haunted, so it's not ghosts. But it could be monsters, could be people, could be some of the villagers. We don't know what it is. We don't even know technically if this is even above the waves. It might be something underwater, which would be very interesting. It might be a very sort of, maybe it's a monastery or something that sunk into the water, very Lost City of Atlantis kind of thing. We can go check that out, and maybe there's all sorts of like Sahuagin or who knows, Kuatoa or some other sort of like fish people that are down there. It could be monsters for us to interact with. Very fun. Right, we got a few left. We gotta proof them. Oh, proof one. Alright, so we do have a point of interest. It is a landmark, landform, or wonder. Okay. Or wonder. We can determine what type it is. Alright, it's gonna be a natural one. Isn't occupied. Occupado. One. I believe that's a monster. Yeah. And again, this can be APL probably 5 to 10. Because it is not the... Actually, I'm going to put the natural up here, just so it's clear that I'm not saying a natural monster, I'm saying the landmark itself is natural. Again, that could be a coral reef, it could be an atoll, it could be all sorts of stuff. Out here, or it could be something underwater again. It's be some sort of whirlpool. What else? Let's keep on proofing. Nearly done. Alright, gotta roll one. Not many left. One, we have 6, 7, 8. No, but we got one right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Great. Alright, is there actually something there? There is not. Nothing there. And nothing there. Alright, so we completed that. That is the end of this level. Band latitude band of everything that we've been looking at. So again, it is unlike the last one. So the last one went pretty quickly. If you guys tuned in for the last thing that we did, we kind of ran through this really quickly down here at the bottom to the south here, because all of those were wild hexes. But as we got more into sort of the frontier, you see it kind of slows down a little bit because the number of POIs that start to show up is exponential. And we can go ahead and, before we finish out everything else, let's do a little zoom out, just so you guys can see the hexes of everything that we're working with. Because this is a pretty substantial map that we're looking at. Let's do one. I think we need one closer to that. There we go. So this is those who have been following along. This is our sort of western continent. It is the smallest of our continents too, but you can tell, this is exactly what we're looking at. So there is a sort of atlas level, which is, you can see all the red hexes mark the boundaries of those atlas hexes, which are larger hexes. And you can take a look at that and you can see sort of like what the primary biome is in each of these. So obviously we have the coast, and then we've got, at the bottom we've got sort of ice cap, tundra, boreal forest, taiga, deciduous forest, mountains. We have some sort of scrubland, chaparral over on the west. We've got across the middle, we have sort of deserts and plains. And definitely coming up. Most of the eastern side of the continent is forested, heavily forested, and then towards the top we get into sort of this is in the southern hemisphere for the most part, so everything towards the top we start getting towards the tropic areas, and we have sort of deep jungles and things like that. And all the text we have here is talking about specifically the sort of major atlas level locations that we're looking at. So as you can see, most of those are kind of off to the west or on the far east side, and we've been kind of dealing in the middle area in this past one where we don't really have a ton kind of going on. But we've finished that all up, but as we get closer to those sort of major capital cities, those major fortifications, those major religious sites, our points of interest hex filling is going to really slow down to a crawl because most of each of those little hexes is going to have something in it. 5 out of 6 of them are. So it'll be very, very interesting once it'll really feel like we hit that civilization, because the population centers are going to start to get really, really dense. There are going to be places all over the place. Every hex you run into, you're going to run into some other sort of major sort of population center, some sort of settlement, some sort of keep, some sort of because they're also weighted. So in the wilds and the marches, the sort of frontier areas, we've only been rolling 1d20s, but in those sort of heartlands, those heavily civilized areas, we also roll 1d12s instead, which has I just have the list in front of me, so I'm just going to read it off. We're more likely to come across settlements, more likely to come across holdings, noble holdings, more religious sites, more travel havens, more crossings, but also more monster lairs, which might seem counterintuitive, but monster lairs is kind of a misnomer. Not necessarily monster, but creatures. So we're going to see a lot of those, because a lot of those are going to end up being artificial monster lairs, which means that they're humanoid-centric. So we're going to come across a lot more sort of like bandit hideouts and things like that, rather than on the wilds where we're dealing with more weird stuff like the aberrations and celestials and fays and outsiders and planers and natural creatures like dinosaurs and all sorts of monsters. But in the Heartlands, we're going to find out a lot more sort of humanoid monsters. So we'll have... This can also include things like drow, stuff like that. So religious sites, travel havens, crossings, monster lairs, meeting places, isolated homesteads, information signage, omens and warnings, natural resource locations, and a lot more constructions. Whereas once we get to the outside, we see more diversity and sort of points of interest that show up. But that is going to be it for that. I'll save that here in a minute off stream. But let's go ahead and do our last little sort of question thing. Ooh, last one's a good one to sort of end on. Which is mastering the art of improvisation. Again, like I said, it comes down a lot to knowing the system will help you a lot. Like, knowing the basics of the system and the maths and how it works will go a long way to making you feel comfortable about improvising specifically the mechanical aspects of the game. So it's always something to kind of keep learning, keep tuning, keep learning a little bit more about. I'd say this is where you want to start thinking about game design and what goes into that, because that'll be really helpful. As far as improvising unexpected actions, so one of the things that's in, again, my DM Minder, one of the primary things that's in here, so other than sort of the mechanical rule stuff that I kind of talked about earlier in the stream, there's also just a lot of tables that I find useful. Like how to improvise traps or hazards, random dungeon encounters, encounter quick matchups, dungeon dressing, Wilderness dressing. Random wilderness encounters. Right? Stuff to do for how to run chases and flights. Exploration, travel when we do the hex crawling. What comes up with that? There's an entire page that's just like what's going on in town. Whenever they walk into a random village, they can do. What's other stuff that's in here? Random settlement information, like stuff about carousing, stuff about random urban encounters, random urban dressing, some downtime information about like crafting, things like that. Carousing. I have an entire page. We've gone over this a lot, obviously. If you watch the solo RPG series, then you'll be very familiar with this. I have a 1D100 NPC table. It just tells you just random, when you just need a random NPC when they run into somebody, who that is. And it's kind of all over the place. So let me give you a couple of examples off the 1D100 NPC table, because they're fun. I really love this table. 17, because it's actually got way more than 100 NPCs on it. Each sort of entry has multiple options. So we rolled a 17, so that's a busker, performer, player, or a Punch and Judy puppeteer. So that could be somebody you run into in the city. It could be somebody you run into in the road. It could be a random person you find in a dungeon. Right? Let's do another one just for fun. 23. 23. Actually, this is one of the very few one-person only entries. A philosopher. So you run into some sort of philosopher. Again, makes sense. You might run into them on the road. They might be doing some sort of pilgrimage or something like that. They might be. You might find them in a dungeon because they've gotten captured. You might find them in a city doing something in a tavern, eating and drinking, all sorts of things. So just random NPCs. After that is 100 different shops and market stalls. So often I will use that in conjunction with the NPC table. So I'll roll a D100 like this. Say that. So 47, and let's say I didn't like the entry on the 1D100 NPCs. Like, that's not going to make sense. So on this one, it's a butcher or fishmonger or grocer. Maybe I'm like, I'm like, that doesn't make too much sense for whatever this NPC is. Then I'll go over to this is actually a bad example because many of those people would be on the shops or market stalls. That's okay. 47 over here might be somebody who's selling herbs, dried or fresh. So that makes sense. Maybe that makes more sense that that's somebody you run into in the wild because it's somebody who's collecting herbs in the forest, right? Whereas it doesn't really make sense for you to run into a fishmonger in the middle of the woods, necessarily. Then after that, I just have shopping tables, goods and services, how much the price of thing, magic item pricings, an entire section on minor treasure, like giving out random minor treasure when your players do things like get into a random encounter. Sorry. And they ask, alright, what's on the bodies? Well, I didn't plan this encounter, so I didn't plan any treasure for it. Sure. And then I have an entire table that's just pocket content, stuff that's in people's pockets. Sure, give me a roll. It's a 2d6 roll. Like, oh, you find, you search their pockets, you find a penny whistle. Right, I ended up rolling an instrument, so something that they would have on them. They've got a whistle on them. Like a musical, like, recorder style flute whistle. I'm like, oh, interesting. Just for random stuff to kind of come across. And then, probably what's most interesting for improvising is what I've got in the back here. So I've got two things. Oops, I've actually taken them out. I could move them somewhere else. That's okay. One is some drop-in NPCs. I've got, like 10 NPCs just written up. They're kind of fleshed out. Other DMs talk about having a names list, things like that. When I need somebody that's a little bit more in depth just their like occupation, which is what the 1D100 chart mainly does. And the other thing that I moved out of here, because I actually moved it over into its own folder because I didn't need it in my DM binder right now, is what I call the parachute file, which is I usually just keep 3 like 1-page, one-shot adventures, like small adventures related to whatever area the party is in the game, like their geographical sort of surroundings. So if they're in the mountains or hills, I'll have 3 one-shots that take place in sort of like mountainous areas and caves and things like that. And I use that as an improvisation source whenever they don't take the adventure hook or they decide to do something I wasn't prepared for. Well, they can run across one of these adventures. And that'll give me enough, basically, content that I don't have to make up an entire session off the top of my head, but it'll give me enough content to get to the end of the current game session, and then I can redo my prep for whatever the next time it's going to be. And so that's really my... If I had to boil down my thoughts about improvisation down to basically one key thing, is that, well, let's say 2. So first is sort of the old Jim Davis WebDM advice, if you've ever watched it, which I really, really love, which is to prep everything you're not prepared to improvise. So if you don't feel like you can come up with names off the top of your head, have a names list. If you don't feel like you can come up with a random hamlet or village off the top of your head, maybe have just a boilerplate hamlet or village that you can kind of pull on whenever you need it. Those sorts of things. Random encounters, those stat blocks, that sort of stuff. Traps, hazards, etc. My second point, which really probably informs my personal philosophy about improvising as a dungeon master or game master, is that we think about it as sort of like this insurmountable sort of obstacle sometimes. And when we think about it in very sort of vague, rough terms, it can feel like that, I feel like. Especially for newer people who are into the hobby, they're like, I could never like improvise an entire session. It's like, it's really, you don't need to do that much improvisation. You really just need to let the players do whatever the players are going to do, because they'll spend most of the session kind of talking to themselves most of the time. Especially if you give them a challenge. They'll sit there and talk about it for 10 or 15 minutes maybe before they actually do anything, which is okay. So my thoughts about it is that I only need to be able to improvise to the end of the session, or until we take a break, right? Because once I hit either the break point of a session, like if I want to, I might only need to improvise for an hour before we take like a meal break or something like that, or until the end of the session, maybe 2 hours, right? It's not that big. It's not that big of a deal, because at either one of those points, I can actually do some prep. In the middle of the session, if they go off the realm, I can, pull up my laptop or phone and do a quick search, try to come up with some sort of adventure or plan some sort of encounter or challenge that I can throw them in, and I only need to improvise enough until I get to the end of the session. Because once I get to the end of the session, guess what? I have an opportunity to prep for the next session. So really, it's not about being able to improvise everything all the time. It's about trying to basically BS enough for you to get to the end of the session. And once you, at least for me, once I think about that constraint, I'm like, oh, improvising is actually not that hard. I just need to kind of throw enough, then I'm going to use the term railroad tracks, throw enough tracks down in front of the train of the players to keep them going to the point where they don't realize that they don't get off the rails. But not that's a really bad metaphor because of what railroading means, I guess. Basically, I just need to keep enough content in front of them that they feel like there's endless content. Which means, if we look at a total typical D&D session, only actually has about 4 or 5 actual real scenes in it most of the time for the average party. So assuming that I only need to do maybe half of those, like maybe 2 to 3 scenes, I can come up with 2 or 3 encounters. I can come up with some sort of hazard or trap or obstacle that they need to figure out, some sort of social RP moment, some random NPC for them to come across and talk to, and get maybe some new adventure seed for an adventure I haven't made yet. But if they decide to go off the rails and I'm like, oh, they're not doing what I planned, so here's a random NPC to talk to. Here's a random NPC to talk to, and maybe that NPC gives them some sort of adventure seed. I don't have to improvise an entire adventure right now. I just need to give them the seed for them to go check it out. If they decide to go check it out, right, improvise them basically getting to the adventure location, and that will probably cover the entirety of the session, what's left in the actual session. And then, in between sessions, I can actually prep what that adventure is supposed to be. Right? It's pretty easy when you break it down to what the actual nuts and bolts of improvising as far as what you need to do as a DM. It's really pretty simple. The only other thing that I would probably add on to that is that probably the most important thing as far as sort of role-playing improvising is to understand sort of the goals and motivations of the NPCs. Like, what do they want? What are they trying to achieve? Right? And especially in relations to the party. So again, right, if we using that random NPC they came across and he gives them an adventure seed, all I really need to improvise is like why this is important to them and why they need the PC's help. Right? That's kind of it. And why they're not competent enough to do it themselves, but they're not adventurers, assumably. That's what the NPC, if it's a random NPC. If it's the fishmonger in the woods, well, they're not an adventurer. And maybe they're out here. Why would a fishmonger be in the woods? They're searching for somebody, because obviously they're not where they do business. So maybe they've got a lost family member. My sister is lost. She came out here to forage for herbs, right? We talked about the herbs. Just using kind of whatever comes to the dump. And that was like 2 days ago, and she never came back, and so now I'm out here trying to search for her. And, you know, being the fishmonger who's out in the woods, who's maybe not used to doing that, be like, actually, I'm also kind of lost. So if you could help me get back to town, and then look for my sister, that would be great. Right, that'll probably take you to the end of the session. You'd be like, alright, well, we gotta take this guy back to town. So we're gonna go do that. Alright, I might throw up some sort of random encounter on the road to there. If not, they're gonna get to the city, they're gonna have to pay the tolls, they're gonna have to go in, they're gonna take the fishmonger back, they're gonna ask about, you know, some rewards. Okay, what can the fishmonger give you as a reward? Give you some sort of physical description of his sister, which I might pull out like my little NPC thing and be like, okay, right, she's tall and wiry, and she has spectacles that are always sort of like falling down on her face. Cool. That's a good description. That's what she was going to. These are the sort of plants she was looking for. So if you have somebody in your party who's got wilderness survival or medicine, etc., they're going to be able to sort of track that down, and then maybe we'll end the session with them setting off from the city again. From the settlement back into the woods, searching for this specific type of mushroom or whatever it is. Boom, that's done. That's improvised the rest of this entire session, and now I know exactly what to prep for the next session. Pretty simple. It's really not that difficult. It's really just kind of go with what comes natural. If it makes sense, then it's probably fine. It's very sort of like Occam's razor kind of thing, where it's like the most reasonable and simple solution is probably the right one. So as long as it passes what they call sort of like the fridge test, the refrigerator test, oh, that sounds reasonable. And even if it's when they're thinking about it after the session, wait, that doesn't make sense. That's alright, because you already improvised everything you need to improvise, which is now, in the moment. You can talk about all the other stuff later. Iron that all out during the prep. But, yeah, that's going to be everything for me today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. We talked a lot about D&D. We got some of our mapping done, answered some questions, all that good stuff. We do the solo RPG stuff once a week, usually on Thursdays, so check that out. Do that. We've been doing that over on Twitch, but I may switch and do some more of that on YouTube. We'll kind of see how things kind of flesh out. I'm thinking that I might migrate more of that stuff over to YouTube, so you might be seeing more streams just like this one over on YouTube in the near future. But lots of fun. Thanks for coming along with you. Thanks for coming along with me, guys. It was always a lot of fun. Hopefully, my cough will get a little bit better, and I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye.